You're juggling it all: work, family, decisions, expectations, six hats, maybe more every single day. But behind the scenes, your body is running on stress, and stress left unchecked will lead to illness. I'm Dr. Shami, an integrated family doctor, and this is Six Hats, the podcast that helps you understand what stress is doing to your body and what you can do about it now. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Six Hats podcast. And today's episode is for the men who are still showing up, still working, still pushing through, and something doesn't feel quite right. Because burnout doesn't always look like collapse. In men, it often looks like functioning, providing, staying strong while quietly running on empty. And the challenge is, many of the early signs are easy to ignore or even normalize. So today, I want to walk you through 5 signs men often miss before burnout really hits, so you can recognize them early and shift things before your body forces you to stop. So today, I'm joined by Dr. Michael Wong, a colleague at Mint Clinic, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Shami. I'm very happy to be here.
So, Michael, from your 25 years of experience as a medical doctor, what have you noticed? What does burnout look like in men?
That's a very good question. And I think the simple answer is it doesn't usually look like anything at all, which is the problem, I think. So it does look like something when the wheels fall off.
Yeah.
But the idea is to try and figure out what's going on before that stage. And that can be difficult to do.
And is it because it's so hard to identify? This is what we're going to go into in detail, like key signs. And I love what you said. It may not look like anything. So what do men tend to present with? Or do they present to you, to the doctor?
Well, yeah, eventually, I think it's going to have to happen. So, but that would be at the stage. If you think about burnout, when I think about burnout, I think about someone who's exhausted and not really able to do the things that they do to be able to function.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's often a prompting, maybe you should see the doctor.
Yeah.
So that's well down the line. But there are signs before that. We just have to know what they are and how to see them. The first thing is, who does this happen to? And that's probably the first thing before we even get to the signs. And this, to me, sets up why it's so difficult to see the signs. So the person who, the man particularly, we're talking about men's health today. Yeah. Of course, all genders can have burnout and at risk of burnout, but particularly for the classic or the stereotypical male who's going to have burnout, it's actually not who you might think. It's not the tired, underperforming, can't really do much, isn't doing much with their life. It's usually the high-performing, high expectation, high functioning, high capacity, can do a lot of things. That's the person, I think, who's at risk of burnout. And it doesn't really make sense initially, but the reason is you get burnout for doing too much. That's probably the most basic way to put it. You do too much that your body can't cope with. And the person who's at risk of that is the person who is in that high-performing job, in that busy life with looking after a family or a partner or their parents, doing so many things in work, maybe volunteering for the local sports club or something like that. But usually someone who's doing a lot. That's the first thing, first little warning sign or first indicator that maybe we need to have a conversation about burnout, because the person comes into me as a patient and I say, what's your life like? And then I'm sort of almost floored by the amount of things that this individual is doing and fitting into their life. And to me, that's what I've learned to look out for as, okay, this could be a risk factor.
I love that you mentioned that, because I'm not laughing, but I'm just thinking about all the stories that I hear as well. And especially in women, how I'm just amazed, like you. I'm amazed what women are fitting into their lives, from, the day job to the evening job to the full-time carer job to then studying. And there is no point in the week that there's any rest. So is that what you find in men as well? Like, do we actually prioritize rest?
I think some people do, and I think it's not often seen as a positive attribute.
Yeah.
So the person who maybe in 20 years ago, when I didn't have this experience of seeing patients like I have now, the person who might be considered underperforming or not meeting their targets for the month of whatever their profession or whatever their job is going to be, the person who might just go home at the normal time of finishing work and not staying back an hour late, and the person who you might have characterized as, oh, they're not really going to get anywhere in life because they're just not driven. They're not really, they don't understand the demands of this job that we're in. That person who you might think is lazy, that person's probably figured it out.
Yes, I
They
love
have
that.
figured out, hey, I'm tired. I'm not really functioning at the moment. I need to just not expect so much and not drive myself so hard. And that's the, I guess, wisdom in hindsight that maybe we haven't quite got the balance right. Of course, I do think there is the thing, the person does exist who really is lazy, who's not doing enough work. That is also probably, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone who is just sensitive and knows when enough is enough, knows when they're tired enough and says, you know what, to the manager or to the family or to the football club or whatever who it is that they need to tell, no, I can't do that extra thing you just asked me to do. I've got enough. I can't take on any more. So that's I guess that's the wisdom. People have figured it out. And that's why I keep seeing it now. Now that I guess it clicked a few years ago that this is the at-risk group for burnout. That's it almost inevitably, the people I see who have burnout, you look back at their history of what they've done in their life, and they've done a lot. They've overachieved, or they've achieved well in an industry where everybody else is an overachiever as well. And that doesn't mean everybody who's an overachiever is going to get burnout. But I think in medicine, we talk about at-risk groups, and this is certainly the population I think is at risk.
So, do you think it comes down to boundary setting, or is it actually societal pressure? Because I know that whole, staying back later, working later is a badge of honor in many industries. So, what drives that in the personality?
That's a very interesting question, and I'd love to know the answer to that. And I do think it is different for every person. Probably the typical thing is someone who's not doing enough, they think, to satisfy the expectations of either themselves or another person. And that probably gets to the first sign, I think. I mean, the first sign really is fatigue or tiredness. And sometimes people come in and say, I feel tired, and they want to know, which is a very reasonable question, do some blood tests. Maybe I'm low in something. I feel like I'm not sure how many times you've ever heard this question, Shami. I feel like I'm low in something. And then we do tests. And then the expectation from the patient genuinely is that they're going to be low in something. Something's going to come back because I'm so tired and I should not be feeling this tired. And I think really that's probably the first sign to talk about when we talk about burnout.
I loved what you mentioned because, everyone knows about when you're feeling tired, the first thing you think about, am I low in iron? And that's especially for females because of the menstrual cycle before they reach menopause. That's so common. And, how often have we heard, go to the GP, you test for iron, it's fine, but I'm still feeling tired. So what do you see in men and in their blood results?
Yeah, if for men it's coming in with tiredness, the most common finding for the blood tests is what we call NAD, no abnormality detected. That
Love that.
really is, and that's where the medical jargon comes in. Sorry for those who are. That's what I mean. But when we say NAD for doctors, it means no abnormality detected, and that's really the most common finding for someone coming in with tiredness. And I do think it's a necessary step to go through. I wouldn't ever say, no, we're not testing that because you've clearly got burnout. No, I think it's a necessary step to go through. And then I think it opens up the conversation, which is why I've always been very particular about patient coming back in to discuss their results. Because sometimes the result that needs the most time to discuss and talk about is the NAD result. It's where there's nothing in the test that I've ordered that indicates why you're feeling tired and run down. And that opens up a much bigger discussion, a broader discussion about, okay, clearly you are tired. You are genuinely, this is not something that's in your head. You are tired. Let's unpack that. What is the reason for this? What could there be? What's going on? And that opens the door to all the other questions that men maybe are less interested in saying upfront on the first consult before you've done those blood tests.
I love that. And we can actually give a few tips about tiredness from sort of the integrative functional health model. But before we do that, I'd love to step into how emotions are displayed in men. How do they present, and how does that reflect in burnout?
Well, how do emotions present in men? Well, I think, well, there are some gender differences. I think there is certainly, I think some change over the last 20 years 25 years since I graduated from medical school. I think there has been some change. But typically, men probably still are a little bit more likely to express emotions as behaviors and not in actual words. Now, of course, I am generalizing here, but I do think it's a reasonable average generalization. So you can tell a man is not happy about something, not necessarily from any particular words that come out of his mouth, by his behavior, by the way he's walking, by the way he's opening and closing a door or a drawer. That indicates probably more about a man's feelings or particular mood than oh, I feel sad or I feel something like that.
Would you describe as irritability or frustration?
I think, yeah, irritability certainly is. I'm mindful of all the family members of men who might be listening to this. You've probably already got the picture of what I'm talking about here. But the man who was not doing well in terms of maybe early stages of burnout,
Mm,
you might think, why is he so irritable?
mm.
Why is he not acknowledging me when he sees me? Why do I not? Why is he less affectionate than he used to be? These are the things that I'm not saying burnout is the cause of all of this, but this is where you start thinking, okay, there is a behavior, there's something he's not doing or he's doing that he wasn't doing before. Maybe that's something that's there is emotionally driving that change. And it's very likely to be perceivable in his behavior before he says anything about the way he's feeling.
I love that. I love that. And I loved how you said it. It's the highly functioning man who's doing a lot. On that note, because he's always almost succeeding, like he's achieving his goals, he's getting a dopamine hit. At what point does he need to realize actually something's not quite right when it comes to behavior? What I'm really getting at is motivation another driver that is affected in burnout?
I think it can be, but I think it often isn't. And I
Okay.
think the issue with that is that the motivation could be coming from a number of different sources. So if the motivation is strong enough, and that might be a pretty strong motivation, like I have to have this job. This is a particularly high paying job that I've got right now, even though this is terrible for so many different reasons. We as a family can't afford for me not to do this job. And that can be a very highly motivating factor to continue doing the thing that's causing the burnout. So I think that's probably the driver in so many situations, that the motivation to continue working stays despite the body kind of breaking down around in the middle of all of this happening.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, moving on to what other signs do men need to look out for? Any physical symptoms?
Well, there's certainly some symptoms that you could look out for. Now, of course, there could mean other things, but what could happen for a man who's experiencing high levels of stress? Well, it's a couple of things that happen, and that could be misdiagnosed, I say, by either doctors or the patient as just being in your midlife.
Mm,
So things like, in no particular order, things like poor sleep, inability to get a good quality night's sleep, either get to sleep or stay asleep or feel rested in the morning. In changes in appetite, eating less but not losing weight, which usually means somehow there's been some activity that's dropped off that they might have used to do. Maybe there was either a walk or a sporting club or an event that they did, or less activity, for example. Putting on weight, especially essential weight, for the non-doctors, that's kind of around your belt line, so that the typical dad bod, if you can call that. So you just seemingly add weight around that midsection. That could be a sign of chronic levels of stress, high cortisol, which can then change the way your body is dealing with up to insulin levels and insulin resistance, fatty liver. These are things that you might have heard about. And those can all be signs or consequences of someone at chronic levels of stress.
I love that you mentioned that because that's easy to recognize and notice. And you're right, Michael. You're so right. How often do we just normalize that? oh, the aging man, of course they're going to put on weight. Why have we normalized that? And I'm such a, I'm really motivated to change that narrative because no, we're just not going to blame it on age. There's so many other things that are going on. And I loved what you mentioned about sleep. What would you say is so easy to just forget that sleep is the most crucial part of the day. And I know many people are like, right, this is the time I can do my work, stay in front of screens to get stuff done because the house is quiet. But what do you find that men say when they talk about sleep hygiene? What are often their barriers to get to sleep?
Yeah, well, the typical one is, well, I have to do work
Mm.
after I get home. But there are a couple of other ones, and sometimes it's work. Sometimes it's just how someone might wind down. So it might not be a surprise to our listeners that having a phone in your hand and scrolling, just before you try to go to sleep is probably not healthy not helpful for a quality sleep. But that's part of what we do. It's either that or watching something on TV with a bright screen. That's also, pretty clearly known and it's been studied, and there's evidence is there that is not good quality sleep, especially late at night. And then the other thing, alcohol, again, not good for good quality sleep. So these are the pretty common responses when you ask someone, what's your daily life and what's when you get to the part after dinner? Probably eating dinner very late is another one. But those are the typical answers.
I'm so glad you mentioned alcohol because in so many instances, again, we've normalized it. One or two glasses at dinner. I use it to relax. I know I hear that a lot, but alcohol, no doubt, disrupts your sleep, especially REM sleep, and it can make you anxious the next day. And what do you find in the stories that you hear from men in alcohol consumption? Do they talk to you about it, or has it been normalized that it's actually not an issue?
Yeah, it's often not something that people want to change. And the first thing I'll ask about, well, the second thing I'll ask about after saying, do you drink any alcohol is, are you happy with the amount you're drinking? And for some people, and this is not for me to say, well, you shouldn't or you should, but that's the first thing I say. And often it's, yeah, I'm happy. I'm okay with that. And then I guess it's my role to say, yeah, that's likely to be affecting your sleep. It's something that if you weren't drinking every night before you went to bed, you probably have better quality sleep. You almost certainly have better quality sleep. So there's usually something else. If the person I'm speaking with isn't really wanting to talk about alcohol, there's usually something else we can focus on. It's not like, oh, okay, well, you've got to stop drinking or I can't help you. So, and then that potentially is the beginning of the journey. Later on, or particularly with people who have quite severe anxiety or burnout where they're not able to work or function, that's usually no more resistance to understanding that I need to do something about this. Everyone's in a different stage of life, and I do think for some men, they're drinking regularly and they're doing fine. And I add that as part of my just general screening questions to ask to see whether there's something that they want to talk about or that we should focus on. But it has been normalized, and I'm not here to tell you can't drink, but I'm here to tell you that if you do and then you stop, you might get better quality sleep.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm glad we mentioned alcohol, but can we also talk about caffeine?
Oh, caffeine.
Always
Yes,
challenging conversation, right? When we talk about caffeine.
absolutely. Yes, that's another one which people probably don't realize affects them as much as they do. And I'll talk about people who drink caffeine a lot and regularly. They become desensitized to caffeine and they don't feel really anything when they drink it or when they consume it. So I'm talking about someone, say, having 2 coffees a day every day and almost never having a day without it. It's very likely that that caffeine is impacting your body and impacting your sleep, but you won't notice it because it's just always there. And it will take weeks if you stop drinking, consuming caffeine before the caffeine's gone, and then you'll actually be able to, know what it feels like to not have the caffeine. Again, it's not something that people will. I'll ask the same question: are you happy with the amount of caffeine you're consuming a day? And often people are very happy with that, and then it's my job to tell that person if you did reduce it or if you did stop it, this is likely to be what will happen, and then that's a discussion we can have if they want to, go there. Or I'll often say, why don't you try it? Give it a month off caffeine and see how you feel. No long-term decision made. See what you think.
Absolutely. Always sort of tell your mind it's an experiment. And a few things I'm going to add: alcohol, caffeine, all just mop up magnesium. And as we know, we love talking about magnesium at Mint Clinic because magnesium is like the mother nutrient. It's so important for sleep, so important for energy, it's required by over 600 chemical reactions in the body. And often, in my experience, Michael, I often just see magnesium deficiency, which just presents in so many different ways, from just simple tiredness to anxiety to sleep issues. And what happens is when you go back to that whole day, that lifestyle analysis, you see all the areas where actually you're just losing it. So you're losing magnesium with caffeine and alcohol, and even tap water. The fluoride in tap water just loses magnesium. And then you've got stress. Stress loses magnesium, which makes you more prone to stress. So I can literally see, oh, I forgot to say about sugar, but I can literally see the day where you lose magnesium because of all these lifestyle habits, which then has an impact on fatigue, energy, sleep, and even weight. So I just wanted to add that in.
Absolutely, yes. It's not something that I don't know about you, Shami, but my patients, usually the stereotypical 40 or 50-something-year-old male hasn't really given magnesium much thought.
Hmm.
So before I see them. So some have, but it's the first time they've heard about it. So it's certainly an area that we can almost everyone that I've seen could improve their health and their sleep by thinking about magnesium.
Amazing. So I'd love to now move on to, if we had to focus on three practical steps. So any man listening to this podcast going, oh, that could be me, or am I on the road to burnout? What key steps would you really encourage them to take right now?
First step is know that you're an at-risk person. Maybe that's the zero step. So if you're that person, and I think you probably know who you are if you're listening, or you probably know your partner is this at-risk group. If they feel like they're going to be able to get through everything, men can have this innate feeling that they're invincible, that they can just achieve anything. And if they don't always feel that, they can probably fake it some of the time, that they don't feel it. And I think that's the important first step, to recognize and accept that every machine has its limits. And you probably, for that person, that individual, understanding that your car, no matter how fancy, whether you bought whatever kind of fancy car, fill the gap in. So you might have a Ford Laser or you might have a Lamborghini. I don't know. Both of those machines do have their limits. And it doesn't matter how high performance that machine is, it's going to have a limit. So that's probably the first step. Learn to recognize when you're at the limit, when you're nearing that limit, and then take some steps to ensure that you don't do damage to yourself by exceeding that limit.
Love that. I love how you gave the car analogy, Michael. Ben can relate to that. I love that. So once you have identified, okay, I could be in this category, what's the next simple step you could take?
Well, I'd love to be able to give everybody a three-step plan, but I will give you this generalized second step. Actually, I do think it's almost universal step. I've got to go back into my notes and see. But the next step is learn how to detach. Almost, and I'm going to say almost, but it probably is everybody that I've seen with burnout has developed an issue where they are unable to detach from whatever the work or stress is that's causing the burnout. Once you're in the thick of it and you can't get out of it, then you actually don't get any rest. Because if you're not detaching, for example, if it's work, and if you're thinking about work 7 days a week, then you're not detaching. And then you're not actually resting. So that's step two. First step is learn to understand and recognize when your body or your mind is being pushed to its limit. And the second one is learn how to detach.
I loved that you said that, because I was actually just reading about a neuroscientist, and he was describing about burnout, and he said it's actually about rumination, and exactly what you said, Michael, when you just can't stop thinking. And I go, do you know what? It's so right. Because you could be at work. Yes, you've got the stress at work, you've got the meetings, everything's happening. But when you come home and you're still at work mentally, you're never switching off. And I love the way you described it, is when you just don't stop thinking about a stressful event.
Yes, I do think it's almost universal. That's part of burnout, is not being able to get rest, even when you're not working. So
Brilliant, brilliant. So the final step that you would like to share, Michael?
Oh, the final step, I think, do you know what? It's probably if you got step one and step two right, I think you're okay. I
Yes.
think you're okay. But the optional, and I think the best and most rewarding step to take is find someone to share the load, which I think men can struggle with, can have the expectation that I have to deal with this myself. I have to be able to deal with all of the stresses that are coming my way and then not share that or tell anybody that I'm feeling stressed or I'm carrying this burden or whatever it might be that I'm feeling or the responsibility. And at the point of one, feeling like nearing the limit, or two, trying to detach, involving someone in your life that you can trust to do that journey with you and not do it by yourself. And it doesn't have to be your partner. I think in a lot of cases, I guess it would be amazing if it was. It could be a mentor, it could be a colleague. It doesn't have to be any specific person, but I do think you're going to enjoy life. Challenge. I'm happy to have anyone challenge me on this. You're going to likely enjoy life more and find it more rewarding by sharing it with somebody else, including the challenging and really difficult parts of it. So yeah, you'll be okay if you know your limits and if you learn how to detach and rest. I think you're pretty safe from burning out. But let's not just be safe. Let's try to share that load and share that journey. And then you never know. You might actually get better at being more productive. You might actually have someone reflect to you. You know what? You did appear a little bit irritable today. Is there something going on that you want to talk about? Have someone in your life that you can have that conversation with and not feel judged and not feel attacked and not feel like you're inferior or you haven't met the expectation. Just have that conversation like with someone who has an understanding like you do that you have your limits. And then for the detaching, it's much more fun to detach from work with someone you love than to go and detach from work. Maybe both are good. But then yes, that's my third.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned about the social interaction and the importance. And I liked what you said about mentors. It doesn't have to be, best buddies, friendships to support you, but just having someone else to talk it through. And I really, really encourage that because we're humans. We're not designed to navigate life on our own. We're designed to work in a village. And I know in today's world, we're so disconnected from extended families and that village environment. And it's just going back to that of offloading the stresses, asking for help. And asking for help doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that you're not doing well or it's not a negative thing, but it actually takes courage to ask for help when you are not doing well. What do you say to that, Michael? Do you see that? Do you see men find it hard to ask for help?
I think so. I think it can be perceived as it is a vulnerability, and you're being vulnerable because you're putting yourself into a position where you're saying, "I can't do this by myself," or I'm finding it difficult to do this by myself." Asking for help, but it's probably the best thing you can do. You do have to ask whether it's the right person. There has to be some trust, but sometimes you do have to reach out and be optimistic and be hopeful when you're trusting someone. It's part of that uncertainty of life, and it's part of we could talk about that loss of control and loss of being able to, predict every outcome. That's again what has to happen when you're trusting somebody. But it's, as I said before, I think it's a much more rewarding way to live life. To trust a little, sometimes you'll be disappointed, but a lot of times I think so that the person you trust might exceed your expectations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Michael. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I think it's going to help so many of our listeners or their partners. So thank you so much. Any final words before we go?
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, please, everybody, look after yourselves, look after your partners, and let's do this together. Let's not do this by ourselves.
Amazing. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for listening to Six Hats, where it's all about progress, not perfection. If this episode spoke to you, don't wait, hit follow now, leave a quick review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Want to take your next step today? Download my ebook. The link is waiting in the show notes. And remember, this is general advice only. Always speak to your practitioner for anything medical. See you next time.